Welcome everyone to Straight Science. This is a evening presentation science series put on in Nome. This is the home office for right now, and we're all know what it's like to be in our respective new worlds. And tonight's speaker, I'm really excited. We have Andrew Orthmann. He is with TerraSound, which is a contractor for the Office of Coast Survey. And this summer, when we had very few boats in the harbor, you may remember seeing a boat that had the banner that would say research on the side, and they were usually on the south dock of the inner harbor, and they're a big white boat. And people, we were all kind of curious, and they just had 105 written on the side of them. And it turns out I did not recognize that, but the TerraSound project and the mapping has been using the qualifier 105. So in a roundabout way, we found that out. So thank you. Andrew is going to talk to us tonight about seafloor mapping. And this is really timely given, I was just telling him that we've had in the last 2 weeks in the Bering Strait region, 3 unescorted 900-foot liquid natural gas tankers transiting from Sabetta, Russia to China and back. And I think maybe I might have a question at the end regarding, you know, how the Russians made chart, but I'll leave that be. They did not enter US waters on their travels. So we're really interested in what you have to do, what you do with seafloor mapping, because it's that kind of traffic that we, I guess, should anticipate. And without good charting, we might have some problems with that. But I'll let you tell your story and take it away, Andrew Orthmann.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you, Gay. Want to confirm you still see my screen okay there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So.
Oh, and for the audience, I'm sorry to cut in. For the audience, know that if you're new to chat, new to Zoom, down on the bottom, you have a bar that looks like a little. There'll be a little bubble icon, like a little someone talking in a cartoon. If you click on that, you'll get a box that pops up on the right, and it's sort of like you can text and you can write your questions or write what you're thinking or whatever. I'll be monitoring that as Andrew's speaking. And if you think of questions that you can't hold until the end, ask them and we'll try to get your questions answered. But that way, Andrew can just chug right on through until the end, and we'll start going through the questions. And of course, you can talk to him yourself. So thank you and sorry for that interruption. Take it away, Andrew.
No problem at all. Yeah, I got the chat box off to my left here, so I'll probably forget about it. So yeah, prompt me if anything pops up there. So yeah, so first off, introducing myself. As Gay said, I'm a charting program manager at TerraSound. Basically, my primary function here is managing our multi-year contract that we have with NOAA. I have a Bachelor of Science in Geography, which I got from UAF in 2000. So it's kind of fun to be doing a presentation for the UAF system. I'm a certified hydrographer. I got that in 2005. I've been doing this work for about 20 years now. Seafloor mapping for nautical chart updating mostly, all under these contracts with NOAA. It's hard to believe that I've already been doing this for 20 years. If you're not familiar with TerraSound, we are a geospatial services company specializing in seafloor mapping. We were established in 1994. We're based in Palmer. We also have offices in Washington State and Texas. We're currently doing some big projects for offshore wind off the East Coast, and we keep busy with those in the winter, and our Alaska work for NOAA in the summers. Office of Coast Survey is our client for all these projects that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation. So if you're familiar with NOAA's Office of Coast Survey, they are responsible among many duties for creating and maintaining our nautical charts, which they've been doing since 1807. And TerraSound's had the honor to be assisting them with this since 1998. And being an Alaska-based company, most of our projects for NOAA have actually been in Alaska. We do work all over the nation, and including for NOAA, and we've done a few for them in the Gulf of Mexico. But because we're in Alaska, we end up doing a lot of the Alaska work. It makes sense. Here's just an overview of the projects we've done for Office of Coast Survey since '98. So all these are pretty big projects. They take a couple months to complete. Big chunks of seafloor, so they're all pretty major projects. But you actually look at the distribution, most of them have tended to be in Western Alaska, down to the Aleutians. That tends to be where they put us. So the presentation, I'm going to touch on nautical charts. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I'm just going to go over that real briefly. Some of the sonar technology that's evolved over the years. And then my main focus is going to be talking about the unmanned technology that we've been using the last 5 years, because I think that's going to be some of the more interesting side of this. So yeah, most of this is going to be about the robots. So nautical charting supports commerce and safe navigation in the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which is 13,000 miles of coastline, 3.4 million square nautical miles of seafloor. So it's a massive job that Office of Coast Survey has for updating the charts in this. You can see from the graphic that a huge amount of this happens to be in Alaska. Just an example of the state of some of the charts. This is northwest of Wainwright. In the Arctic, these are sparsely charted, poorly charted areas. Some of the soundings up here actually go all the way back to the Russian era, which surprises me when we try to figure out the source of some of these, that they were basically brought over from old Russian charts. So example of like one of the biggest gaps here. Here's a gap between soundings. There's 24 nautical miles with not a single sounding on the chart. And some of these soundings that you see here are miles apart. What's in there? Probably nothing, but how do we know? And so the Arctic area is particularly bad, but it's all over Alaska. And even in the lower 48, there's a lot of areas that are either out of date or have no charting soundings at all. Of course, just a brief history of how the technology's changed, which kind of leads into some of the unmanned stuff that's changing it even more. Of course, you got lead lines, lowering a weight on a rope and physically measuring how deep it is. What's funny is we still do this, but not for charting anymore. We do it as a great quality control tool. We love to take a lead line and lower it next to our fancy multi-beam sounders and make sure we're getting the same thing. So we still use them, but more as a quality control tool, but that's how things were done for a long time. Wire drags were a big thing for a while, especially in the early 1900s. You actually drag a line that's weighted at a known depth between two boats and across a bay or an area that you want to see how deep it is and see if it's going to snag up on anything. Then we started getting into single beam echo sounders in the 30s and 40s, which of course is just a single depth underneath a boat. And we still use single beam. You still see it on, that's your echo sound fish finders and echo sounders on your skiffs or other boats. And then as we moved into the 80s and 90s, we started getting this full coverage sonar technology, specifically multi-beam sonars, which is a swath shaped sonar. And then as well as side scan sonars, for both of these give you full coverage. And they have their different uses. We still use these a lot. They're both full coverage technologies. And over here on the right is kind of the evolution. Like lead line, you can get some soundings. Not very fast, and you don't know what you're missing. Then came single beam. You can get a lot of soundings fast, but you still have these areas in between. You don't know what's there. And then multi-beam, advantage being that, in this theoretical picture here, there was this whole bunch of rocks in between there that you wouldn't have caught with the other methods. And I just wanted to show this image real quick. This was actually from a job I did off of California many years ago. And you picture California, oh, all their charts just got to be great. But this is off of, I believe it was Trinidad. And you can see the coloring is the multi-beam coverage. overlaid on the nautical chart. The black numbers are the soundings in feet that were charted. The red soundings are in feet, and that's derived from the multi-beam data. And the interesting thing here, if you can see where my pointer is, the charted was 100 feet, 110 feet, 108. It's all roughly 100 feet. And there was freighters going by that draw over 30 feet off to the west of this on the main shipping lanes. So for 50 years while this chart was there, nobody knew there was 26 feet of water right here. So it was so a lot of this is just kind of disasters waiting to happen. If a freighter happened to leave a shipping lane for some reason, come in here and hit something like this. And what we find when we survey these areas, that were surveyed with single beam like 50 years before, is like where you see 110 feet. We found that to be incredibly accurate. We're still getting 110 feet. We're still getting 108 feet. But what you're missing is stuff like this. Just off 100 feet or so from this sounding, it's 26 feet. So anyway, this was kind of a outstanding example of an area that you would think, oh, California must be great charts. There's some bad stuff down there too. So the old methods of surveys and going into these newer methods, multi-beam, side scan, etc. Still a common thread with needing people on the boat there to operate these systems physically from the boat. So this is just an example of a few of the boats and situations that we've used with TerraSound. And down here is the NOAA ship Rainier, which of course does a lot of work up in Alaska as well. The Qualifier 105 is the vessel that Gay mentioned earlier that you'll see in Nome now and then. We've been using that boat for our surveys in Alaska pretty continuously since 2013. It's worked out pretty well. You're going to see it in a lot of the slides coming up here. So as unmanned technology started to become more available, the benefits of that were pretty clear. And we wanted to get into this and start trying to use this for a survey. There's a concept we call a force multiplier. And the idea is it takes a lot of effort to get one of these big boats to these remote areas, a lot of expense, a lot of effort, a lot of fuel burn. So once we're there, why don't we multiply our force in some way? Instead of just mowing the lawn with the big boat, can we put out robot boats to basically do the same work alongside the larger boat and collecting the same type of data and basically, doubling your work or more if you can manage more of these boats. So, that was a potential benefit of unmanned boats. Safety, anytime you can keep people out of harm's way. There's been unfortunate incidents over the years with survey boats and crews that have died or been injured. Anytime you can keep people off these little boats and increase their safety is good. And then environmental impact, burning less fuel, less noise. All these are good things that unmanned boats can help us with. So first opportunity that we got to put this to work was in 2015, right off the Bering Strait. We were assigned this project called Prince of Wales Shoal, and just north of Wales. So yeah, you can see the overview here. This was the first time that we ever used an unmanned survey vessel on a NOAA project. This was sort of a trial or experiment for us. I said this was our first time using a robot boat. We got a hold of this company. They're based in Louisiana, ASV Global. They're now L3 Harris ASV, and their primary experience was working with the military to provide target drones. So that's what this boat was. It was a 12-foot long, really fast, had an outboard. I believe it had a 50-horse outboard on it. Supposed to zigzag around and be shot at by the military for practice. So one of the interesting things about this is you can see this plate here. So this is a plastic plate. We replaced it to reduce the weight a bit, but this was designed to be, I believe it was 3/4 inch steel. And they wanted to surround this area where the outboard was. The idea is if they pump this thing full of holes, hopefully they can recover at least the outboard. So of course we didn't need that plate steel and got rid of that, but that's kind of why this structure was here. But it was converted into a really basic hydrographic survey boat, single beam echo sounder, GPS, just to give this a try. And so shipped it up to Alaska, mobilized it on the Qualifier 105 in Homer, and brought it out to the Bering Strait for this project. You know, we began getting it out on anytime the weather was good to work alongside the larger boat, basically as a remote control boat, but able to run lines that you tell it to run, and hopefully straight lines, in this sort of unmanned but monitored mode, and that we always have a radio link and eyes on it. So this was sort of how it was operated with, you got this guy on the left, he's running the survey equipment on the Qualifier 105, but he can also pull up a monitor and access the computer that's on that remote boat. And so the view on the right is what he would see coming from the remote boat. Basically a remote desktop connection if you use that in computers. You can, you know, remotely access a computer over a network as if you're sitting in front of it. And that's kind of how we work with this thing over a Wi-Fi network. So this is a kind of a interesting side story. When we actually first got this thing up to Alaska, we mobilized it in Homer, brought out to the Bering Strait. We didn't actually put it out right away because of weather, but we had to make a side trip to Kotzebue. And so of course, when you go in there, it's shallow at this bar here, 5-6 feet, and the Qualifier 105 draws 6 feet, so it's scraping bottom when it goes through here, and the tide and the wind has to be just right. But so we hadn't actually put that robot boat in the water yet, but we got here and we're like, well, it's so shallow, you know, why don't we put this thing to work? We'll get it out in front of the Qualifier 105 and let it scout. And so we can actually see, is there enough water to get through here? Well, we got it out, we got it in front of the Qualifier 105, started following it, everything seemed fine. And then we lost radio contact with it. And it was supposed to go into a mode where if it loses radio contact, it just stops. Well, it didn't do that. It's like software locked up or something. And it kept going at whatever the speed was that we'd set it at. I think it was 3 or 4 knots, so it wasn't terribly fast. And it was on a heading hold, and it just off it went. And we kind of watched to our dread as it went off into this uncharted, unsurveyed area, extremely shallow mud flats. And we're kind of like, oh, what kind of mess is this going to be to try to get this boat back? But yeah, we lost communications here, it kept going. Fortunately, it started grounding out on some mud flats here, and we were able to go pick it up with the skiff and tow it back. So this image just shows some of the soundings. It was logging data from its echo sounder the entire time, even though we didn't have radio contact. It was recording that data. So you can see the charted soundings, 5-6 feet. You know, this is what it was logging. It's 6 feet through there. And you can see on this image here, getting shallower and shallower, and it started grounding in, 2 feet, 1 feet of water. And this is actually the path that was still logging data as it was towed back with the skiff. So this was a learning experience for us. And we knew this was going to be an issue. Deploying a little boat with a crane is never a great thing. And if you've ever done that from sea, anytime you get a big boat rocking at all, even with tag lines, these loads can get out of control really quick just from the swing. So it really limited us to only putting this thing out in just ideal weather conditions. And Bering Strait is extremely rare to have beautiful weather like you see in the picture. So when we would get that, it's like, okay, put it out. Let's get some work with it. So as a result, it didn't log very much of the mileage on that project. LNM, I'll use that term a few times. It's linear nautical miles, basically how much survey data was collected mileage wise. It logged about 5% of the overall miles. All the black lines you see here were logged with the larger vessel, the Qualifier 105. The red are sections that we did with the ASV. So not much. but it was a learning experience. Great introduction to unmanned vessels for us, things to watch out for, lessons learned, mostly kind of leading into the next vessel that I'll show you here in a minute. And this one had a really cool first. This was the first data collected from an unmanned vessel to be used to update a US nautical chart. So it's kind of cool. First robot data to go on a chart was from the Bering Strait and this little target drone. But anyway, we definitely loved the technology and we wanted to continue to help develop it. So we went back to L3 Harris ASV and we worked with them hand in hand to kind of develop a vessel that was more specific or purpose built for hydrographic surveying. So they funded it all internally, but they relied on us to provide basically guidance on what makes a good survey boat and basically assurances that we intended to use it on projects. So to make a good survey boat for us, we wanted it to be able to put in a variety of survey equipment, be able to be transportable, shippable, fit on relatively small back decks of larger vessels, especially that Qualifier 105 that only has about a 20 by 20 foot back deck. So we can't go too crazy with what we put back there. Has to be able to follow straight lines, has to have a good communication range. It's not much use if you're out of range in 100 yards or so. We want to get at least a few miles away from the larger boat. Endurance would be important. That Sea Target 3, it could go maybe 18 hours till we had to pull it, put gas in it, and then redeploy it. And anytime you're doing that, you're taking the large vessel off of its work to manage. So it ends up more of a headache than it's worth almost at a certain point. So we needed to have something they could just put out and it could just work and not have to touch the thing very often. It also had to be deployable, recoverable, and also able to collect data in the bad weather that we see in Alaska. And so kind of this Sea Worker 5, the name of the boat, was born. It's 18 feet in length, 5.5 foot beam, weighs a little over 2 tons. The endurance is just great on this thing. It has a little diesel engine, a Yanmar diesel, I believe it was a 70 horse. It can basically go for up to 6 days straight, 24/7 at survey speeds, which are usually 6 or 7 knots. And then we pull it back on deck, put fuel in it and put it back out. So to just have to deal with that, roughly once a week really is not much of an interruption. It supports a variety of sonars equipment. And probably one of the best things about this boat is it included a launch and recovery system, or LARS. So here's kind of the conceptual diagram of a LARS. The NOAA ships use similar systems for getting the boats off and on. It's a dual davit system. There's not much room in rough weather for this to swing back and forth. So it really increases your weather windows for dealing with this boat. So here it is actually installed on the deck of the Qualifier 105. This photo here was taken in Bethel. You can see the Sea Worker 5 on the back deck. You can see the LARS system arms here. This picture was taken in Homer shortly after mobilization, a little bit better, showing how that is set up. Basically welded down to the deck. At the end of the season, it's ground off the deck and shipped out of state. So first time we put this to work was 2016 in Edlin Strait. So there's the project area there. This job required simultaneous multi-beam and towed side scan sonar. So it was going to be a fairly challenging job for this boat. Instead of just a multi-beam, it was going to be doing multi-beam and have a winch installed to tow side scan. A pretty big area, 570 square nautical miles of seafloor. One of the interesting things about this job is we were assigned to do the job, and I believe we were going to start in July. But shortly before we got there, it hit the news that this chemical tanker had grounded in the survey area that we were going to go out and survey anyway. But they thought they had plenty of water, and they grounded right here. Luckily, it's all mud and silt out there, not many rocks, and they were able to back off at a higher tide and and they didn't spill anything or damage. So it just kind of illustrates the things that could go wrong, and more of the reason why we do this work. So on the back deck of the larger vessel, we put a 16-foot container to give a little more working room for our staff. It's basically set up like this, how we've been operating it. Guy on the left over here, his responsibility is monitoring how that ASV is doing. He's got a screen that shows its fuel levels. He can control relays to power off or on equipment remotely. He has a streaming view here of a camera that's on the deck of the ASV. Let's see. Yeah, you can see a little bit bigger or a little bit better in this image here. That's basically off the bow of the ASV. And then he's got a photo, or he's got a video as well of the back deck of the ASV and its winch, so he can see what's going on. On his screen here, it's got a few fuel tanks he can move fuel between and just monitor how it's doing. And over here on the right is a survey technician who, once again, through that kind of remote desktop view over the Wi-Fi network, is operating the side scan sonar and the multi-beam and making sure we're getting the data that we should. And so that's kind of how we've been operating that, with 2 people on each shift monitoring it. You could consolidate this and do it with 1. It's kind of not how we've been doing it, but you definitely could. Meanwhile, just communications with the bridge of the Q105. This setup is still dependent on basically somebody on the bridge of the larger boat keeping an eye out for vessel traffic and things that we need to be aware of. That video view from the ASV is really low to the water. It's just not that great unless you're right on top of something. So we're still dependent on the big boat saying, hey, you're going right toward something. You need to turn around. And also there's communication with the acquisition room on the larger boat. So this is, where we're acquiring data on that boat, and we have to coordinate with these folks for what boat's going to be doing what for data collection. So yeah, this coordination between the vessels, we had to figure out how to make this work. This is sort of the formation we ended up. Here's the ASV kind of forward and starboard of the larger boat, kind of easy to keep an eye on and run lines that are parallel. So yes, it took a little bit of learning how to make everybody play nice, and also avoid sonar interference. If the boats are too close to each other, the sonars are on similar frequencies and can actually interrupt each other. So it's kind of a fine line there, not too close, not too far. So that year, I said that was our first year using the Seaworker 5. It was a big success. We loved the boat. They acquired 44% of the mileage on this Edelman Strait project, so over 2,200 linear nautical miles of data. Surveyed areas that are too shallow for the larger vessel to get, and proved it had really good endurance and weather capability. So here's just a kind of a typical survey day out there, and I don't know, probably 4-foot seas, and it does just fine. They operate, we get good data on 4-footers. We can safely pick it and deploy it in 6-foot seas. We try not to let it get worse than that, but we have to pull this thing in 8 or 9-foot seas too. So a lot better than trying to crane stuff off and on. That year there were some issues with the radio range. I think we were getting 1 kilometer or 2 out, which wasn't great. That was fixed in later years. Side scan winch, that can be interesting when you have a robot boat that's towing expensive equipment, and suddenly it's like, oh, the winch isn't working, and now you have this equipment it's towing, and you don't want it to stop because that equipment's going to end up on the seafloor, possibly damaged or lost. And so we got pretty good at actually lifting the ASV onto the qualifier 105 with the cable out, which you can kind of see in this picture here, and then get a few guys manhandling this equipment back on the deck as fast as we could. So that was kind of fun. So here's where we've kind of used these robotic boats since 2015. I showed you that Cape Prince of Wales Shoal project already with that target drone. 2020 Norton Sound. So I'll cover that one shortly. That was our most recent with that boat. There's 2016 Edelin Strait, which I just showed. 2019 in Kuskokwim Bay, we put it out, and also 2017 and 2018 projects down here in the Aleutians. And I'll go over those two next. So yeah, so we put it to work down here in the Aleutians. Pavlov Islands 2017 project area near Sand Point. Unimak Pass down here in 2018. It's actually not in Unimak Pass. That's what the project was called. It's a little closer to False Pass. Really a different area for using this. This was, really rugged coast, rocky terrain, new challenges. Surveying into, roughly 3 meters of water can get you really close to these rocks, and all the way out to fairly deep, 200 meters or so. Also dealing with like salmon fisheries and crab pots. Fishing nets was a new challenge. We actually ran this thing, unfortunately, into a poor fisherman's net, fishing for salmon near Sand Point. Got it so tangled up, we had to basically cut the net with the fisherman's help, him cursing and yelling the whole time. And it's a long story short, we ended up buying him a new net and paying for some lost fisheries. It was like a $12,000 mistake there, but sometimes it can be hard to see some of these things from a video screen that's right on the water, and everybody kind of shared blame. The captain on the qualifier is like, I wasn't watching close enough. And, well, anyway, it happened and we learned. Also tangling in things like crab pots with the little tiny buoys right on the water, really hard to see. This is the kind of terrain that we'd work around in that area with. You can see how close it has to get to some of these rocks to get to our depth limits. So when it's operating in these areas, it's not in any kind of autonomous mode. It'll run lines autonomously. It'll collect data autonomously. You can actually assign it an area and it will maneuver on its own. Or you can tell it to run a line and then just hands off, just watch what it does. But in these areas, it's not there yet. Basically, it has to be remote control. So that the guy running it grabs a console, and he's basically intently staring at the sonar data and maneuvering the boat around these rocks. And luckily, it's really maneuverable, can stop almost on a dime. But yeah, basically becomes a remote controlled boat when it's working these really tight areas. So skipping to the next year, 2019, Kuskokwim Bay. This was kind of a new challenge. This was a huge area of just totally unsurveyed at the mouth to the Kuskokwim River. Really shallow mud flats, narrow channels, most of our survey areas, we have something to go off before we get there. There's some kind of charted soundings. They may not be good, but we can sort of plan. So this area was unique, and it was basically nothing to go off other than we knew it's going to be shallow. So this year, or in 2019 for this project, once again, this boat was great. We did a huge amount of scouting. Basically, you got the qualifier 105, and like in this picture here, in some areas it would just anchor, or it would just sort of motor behind the ASB as it would zigzag. And it's like, oh, too shallow, back the other way, okay, too shallow, and sort of figure out where all these little shoals and things are that you can't see until we sort of got a base map of the area, and then could actually start running some serious line miles. So really handy for that year. So that gets us to 2020, Norton Sound project. Once again, qualifier 105 and this Seaworker 5 boat. So we had some really shallow areas. They wanted us to go into 2-meter water depths near Stebbins down here, as well as St. Michael to survey in where some of the barges come in. So that was yeah, shallower than we normally go. And actually really rocky coast along here too. You get the sand and the mud out here, but as you get in closer to shore, a lot of rocks. This example of some of the multi-beam data collected from that Seaworker 5. This is Stephens Pass. Really beautiful data we collect in there. You can see the rocks and the scour from the water movement through there. We found an uncharted wreck in St. Michael Bay. So this is what it would look like in the multi-beam data, not much to it. Water depths are shown in meters, so this is all 5.5 meters deep. Top of the wreck comes up to 4.3 meters. Here's some of the images and the soundings. You know, it looks like a barge, a little over 90 feet long, 30 feet wide. You know, not much left of it, maybe some of the structural parts of it. Here's an image of one taken with an aerial drone near St. Michael, which I'll talk about a little bit more later too. So it looks an awfully lot like some of these derelict barges that they have grounded there near St. Michael. So just an interesting thing on this is how much we've been increasing our production with unmanned vessels over the years with this combination of the Qualifier 105 and these unmanned boats. You go back to this first year, actually cutting off the bottom of my screen a little bit. But basically, this is 2015. That was at Cape of Prince of Wales Shoal. And then way over here, we have 2020 with Norton Sound. So the blue is collected with the manned larger boat, and the orange is collected with the unmanned boat. So you can see over time, we've been increasing our production, but also doing more with the unmanned vessel than the larger boat. And so for Norton Sound, that was one of our biggest projects ever in terms of line miles. That was over 9,100 linear nautical miles we collected. And, you know, pushing 60% of that was done with the Seaworker 5. So yes, we're at the point where we're actually getting more data with the unmanned boats. And reason for that isn't necessarily that it's more productive than the manned boat. It's just that some of these areas are so shallow, we can only do it with a small boat. And the larger boat actually stands by within radial range as we survey some of these areas. But also shows that this boat's been incredibly productive too. We're definitely not losing much by using it. So getting away from use of the Seaworker 5, this is another project we did in 2020 for NOAA Office of Coast Survey. North Slope of Alaska contour development, AKA we call it our sail drone project. So North Slope shown there. So primary mission objectives for this was to locate the 20-meter and 50-meter depth curves off the North Slope, not only to figure out where those were, because that area is shown earlier is so poorly charted, but also to assist with planning future surveys up there. We wanted to demonstrate the ability to accomplish entirely unmanned seafloor surveys in remote areas, and also just to test the feasibility of this sail drone technology for seafloor mapping in general. So as you probably know, these sail drones have been up to the Arctic quite a bit, but mostly for collecting oceanographic or meteorological data. But this was sort of a new use case for these for actually mapping the seafloor, and Office of Coast Survey hadn't previously used these for mapping, so it was really a new use case for this technology. If you're not familiar with these are made by a company called Sail Drone, based in Alameda, California. They're unmanned science vessels. They're entirely wind-driven sailboats, no engine or props. So they're totally at the mercy of the wind and currents. As a result, they're slow, normally 2 or 3 knots, but they're incessant. They go for 24/7, weeks, months at a time. It's amazing what you can accomplish at 2 or 3 knots if you never stop. Solar panels to power their electronics, relatively small, 23-foot boats, of course, 0 emissions, worldwide range. They've had these things out up to a year straight. Apparently, the biggest limiting factor is biofouling. Over time, those get so much growth on them that they don't move effectively anymore, or cover some of the sensors, so they got to get cleaned off once in a while, but they can go. They carry a suite of scientific instruments by default. They're highly visible. They have AIS, radar reflectors. They're designed to hopefully be seen by boats that might run them over, since these things are slow and can't get out of the way. Remotely monitored by satellite. And if you're involved with the mission, you can access the mission through an online portal that Sail Drone developed. It's pretty cool to actually see where it is on a map and have different layers and see how the instruments are doing. So yeah, so a whole bunch of instruments on these things. The one we were most interested in for this mission was the Echo Sounder, single beam on the keel. So back to the North Slope being poorly charted. The area, is of increasing priority for chart updates. It's incredibly expensive to reach. So it's an image here of like kind of a conventional survey method with the fair weather. It's a lot of effort to bring a big boat to these areas and a lot of expense. So always looking for kind of better ways to survey. And an area like this also benefits from low impact approaches. Bowhead whale migrations, just a really sensitive area, and minimizing what we're putting into the air and the water is always a good thing. So for this project, we used 4 sail drones. We talked initially about shipping them to Dutch Harbor and releasing them from there, and then retrieving them from there, and then shipping them back to California. But this was in the spring, and with all the COVID-19 travel restrictions, it just wasn't going to be too easy to do that. So a decision was made just to let them loose from California. So yeah, Sail Drone released these things on May 28th from San Francisco Bay. They towed them out of the bay and waved goodbye. Off they went. They took a little over 2 months to arrive off of Point Hopes, and they began to trickle in there in early August after about a 3,000 nautical mile transit. It was very successful, and no issues, no major issues on the transit up. Survey plan, and I think, yeah, Bart's on the call here. Actually, Bart was involved a lot with this. This image on the left was kind of our ideal survey plan. This blue, we were supposed to get 2 of the sail drones to follow this, approximate 50-meter contour, zigzag back and forth over it to define it. The red line was the planned survey of a 20-meter contour. Of course, the best laid plans always fall apart. We encountered the ice pack, which really limited how far north we could go. The bowhead whale migration was early, and so we had to set up these large mitigation zones around some of the communities and not approach them. There was issues with equipment on a couple of sail drones. So this image on the right shows the actual paths of the 4 sail drones. We did get 2 of them to get all the way over to the Canadian border. So overall, I think we got most of the contours developed, but yeah, a large part of it we didn't reach just because of these issues. So yeah, so following the Arctic mission, they were all south of Point Hope by the end of September. We had some additional days in the contract for them, so we took advantage of that, and we peeled 2 of them off to go back into Norton Sound, and they actually collected data to overlap with the Norton Sound project that we did with multi-beam earlier in the summer. And so we have some data to compare there between the 2 projects. And then we still had some additional days, so we did some more work in this really poorly charted area down here in Kuskokwim Bay. They were all out of Alaska by the end of October. 3 of them got back to California in early December. Then 1 of them was lagging behind and got caught in a big storm in the North Pacific I think it was right around Thanksgiving. It was damaged. Best idea of what happened is that main sail collapsed. Now Sail Drone is still tracking it. They have other repeater systems to track those on there. And the last word is that one is in Queen Charlotte Sound in Canadian waters north of Vancouver Island. So we're thinking we're going to get that the data from that boat in the next couple weeks or so, depending on who they can round up to pick that boat up. And we're actively processing that data now for NOAA, and we're going to send that to them at some point next month so they can put it on the charts. So just a summary of the vessel work. It's really kind of 2 different ways to use these unmanned boats. You got kind of the force multiplier concept. You know, you still got a manned boat in the mix, and you deploy the robot boat or boats, you know, as theoretically shown in this picture, versus the kind of sail drone approach, which is kind of a totally different way to do this, where these things can be hundreds of miles from anybody and nowhere near anywhere to be assisted. For example, the one that was damaged, you know, when that happened, it was 500 miles from the coast. It's like, well, we can't do anything about that. We're just going to have to wait until it ends up near some shoreline. When it's within about 20 miles or so, we'll get a boat to get it. But other than that, it's on its own. But yeah, both these methods, you know, clear benefits to safety, productivity, capabilities. Yeah, we're going to continue to use both of these wherever they make sense. So I wanted to touch, hopefully not going too long here. I want to touch briefly on our unmanned aerial systems. I would like this stuff's been really cool. This shows that Pavlov Islands and vicinity project down the Aleutians, closer to Sand Point. It's the first time we use this. But a lot of these jobs, NOAA, one of the common assignments is shoreline verification. And what it is basically, while we're there collecting all this bathymetric data, meanwhile, you have all these rocks and stuff along the coastline that are charted. Are those actually there? Those were sourced from you know, old data, satellite imagery. So part of our job when we go to these areas is to actually to verify that these features are there. You know, these are rocks, islets, ledges, reefs, foul areas, things like that. And so here's how they would assign that. You know, basically vectorized data. Here's the shoreline. Here's all these rocks. Now it's kind of deceiving. It's actually a pretty big area. This was about 100 and I'm going to say 150 nautical miles of coastline that we have to do all these investigations. Yeah, so it's a pretty big area. I think this was 700 individual features to investigate. So here's how we would have done it prior to 2017. Basically, it was you know, bring this qualifier 105 or whatever boat we're using in close to shore. You know, weather had to be good. We wanted low tide, so the rocks would be sticking out of the water so we could see them. You know, crane a skiff in the water, and then basically you know, drive along the coast. You know, with a laptop and these things in some GIS software to see if these actually exist and investigate. The problem with this is you usually can't directly approach these things. Like this image here, like these rocks, you know, they're awash. The waves are breaking on them. We're not going to get a skiff up on them to take a GPS position. So this guy here has got binoculars. Like, well, we're as close as we can get. I see a rock over there. It looks approximately where it's supposed to be, and then we would estimate a height. Like I think it's about 1 meter out of the water. You know, do you agree? I say it's 2 meters, so let's call it 1.5 meters. Write that down and go to the next one. So really low confidence in the measurements, just because you really can't very often directly approach these things. Also, what's not being seen, like you know, part of it is we're investigating assigned features, but there's common to find stuff like, hey, we're supposed to look at that rock, but there's another big one sticking out of the water over here that's even more significant. So we would position the new rock so it can go on a chart. But things that are under the water can be really hard to see from a skiff unless you're right on top of them. So, you know, what are we missing? Low efficiency. This takes a lot of time and effort, and it doesn't happen very fast. And then it gets back to kind of, you know, one of the biggest is the safety concerns. You know, anytime you got people in little boats that are playing around the rocks and you're craning skiffs off and on, every time you do that, things can go wrong. So you know, we wanted to keep it simple. We started using just off-the-shelf DJI Phantom 4s. You're probably familiar with these, or you may even own one. Buy them from Amazon or Best Buy or whatever. Affordable, simple, you know, but incredibly capable. 15-20 minute good solid flight times. Got a 20 megapixel camera, really good image quality. Really don't have to do much to make this work. So instead of the skiff, we get close to the area where the rocks are and we launch this off the top deck. We set this up on kind of automatic flight lines. So we get it off the big boat and say, okay, go do the route. And so back to kind of this unmanned autonomous method of just following predefined lines, much more precise than we could ever steer by hand, to make sure it passes right over all these features that are assigned. We commonly did these at 400-foot altitude, which was the highest legal limit for operating these drones. About as fast as we could get away with and get good image quality, which is 45 kilometers an hour. So this thing's really booking. And a lot of that was designed to get at least 3 photos on the objects for the processing, which I'll discuss next. So you can kind of see here this rock and the successive photos here. So manual recovery at the end of the mission. Missy comes back to the boat, suit up with PPE just in case, and grab it, and there we go. And we go bring it downstairs, download the photos so we can process them. So the processing for this stuff is structure from motion software. So if you're not familiar with this, it's a photogrammetric range imaging technique for estimating 3-dimensional structures from 2-dimensional image sequences. So basically it does some really fancy math for the different angles on the same object to calculate, basically build a full 3-dimensional model of whatever feature getting photographed from different angles. So it works on structure, bridges, vehicles, houses, but also works quite well on rocks and shoreline. So this was one of the first times I think this was put to work for, especially on NOAA Office of Coast Survey work, for using this certain methodology. So here's just an example in that same area. You got the NOAA chart. You got rocks and stuff along the coast, and then we have these basically photo mosaics. So part of what the software spits out is, instead of you got all these separate images, seamless, really nice, tight image in these big strips along the coast. So we can overlay that with what we were assigned and compare it to what was assigned versus what we're finding. And this is actually like 3 missions. You can see like a seam here in the data and one here. So each sections of these are probably a couple miles of coast, and they're all overlaid. Hopefully this is coming okay through on everybody's end, but just to show some of the quality, like this is schools of salmon. You can see them flowing along the coast here, and really good water clarity in the Aleutians. That's why this one's kind of a cool one to show off. So two products out of this interesting to us: orthomosaics, which again are just those really high quality mosaics of all the imagery that are georeferenced. 2 or 3 centimeter resolution, really great resolution on this stuff. You can zoom in and see pebbles on the beach. Also generates the digital elevation model, and that's important so we can actually pull heights off of these features. So here I'm kind of highlighting a rock that would be important for navigation because it's the furthest seaward in this little area. So we're going to zoom in on that. So this just shows in the software what we can do. So we build this model, we can drape the mosaic over the elevation data, basically zoom in, and we're measuring a height here. It's 4 meters above sea level. And there we go, we can assign a height and a position to that rock. Just a cool rendering here of shoreline. I think the main point here is, like, you see an incredible level of detail, and all this was from only maybe 30 seconds of data, like a pass down and back, and you can generate stuff like this. Beats the heck out of trying to get up close to this with a skiff. Yeah, so cool stuff. Just an example, we get overlap between the 2 data sets, so we try to, here you can see in that, this is in the mosaic imagery, you can see a rock sort of lurking under the water there. And then, we surveyed the same area with that ASV with the Seaworker 5. You can see the multi-beam data. They're both in exactly the same position, so it's a good quality check. It's like, wow, the sonar data agrees with the aerial drone data, within a meter or so. So yeah, good check there of the two data sets. Here's just an example. The red is like what NOAA would assign us to investigate, usually pulled from the chart. Now this was like a foul limit, saying everything inside of here was foul because the rocks are numerous. And then of course, we fly over it, build the mosaics and the DEMs, and we can give them back this really nice definition going, okay, well, it's actually a little further out is where this line should be. And definitely want to include these rocks out here, digitize a new rock here. This rock we don't see at all that was assigned. But yeah, just great detail on this stuff. And just kind of bringing it closer to home for everybody in the Bering Strait region. This is back to the Norton Sound job. We use the aerial drones as well. So here's just an example at Stephen's Pass. So like see these little islands were assigned for us to investigate. Are they there? Are they not? Should they be removed from the chart? Do they need any modifications? And so here's zooming in. It doesn't look like much, just a blob on the chart. You can see on the image. The colored data is the multi-beam data from the boat. So, it's only going into 2 or 3 meters. So, it's not going to tell us anything about this feature here. And on the right is the exact same area with the mosaic built over it. So yeah, so we can see that assigned island. Zooming in, there it is. Really nice detail. See the driftwood on there. And then the blue stuff is what we digitized from this to give back to NOAA. Okay, it's an island. Here's the limit of the coast. It has a high point that's about 2 meters above mean high water. It has a ledge that extends off of it that's going to be exposed at low water. So yeah, so we can give back an incredible level of detail that'll eventually go on a chart. So with that, yeah, I'm kind of at an end. I just thought this was a cool image from the aerial stuff. This is an aid to navigation, Coast Guard light. You would think this was a video, but this is also rendered from those images into a 3D model and overlaid. And again, I think this one was 15 seconds of data just from the drone passing over this. Anyway, so that's what I got.
Thank you so much. You just blew me away on seafloor mapping. I had no idea. That was awesome. Awesome presentation. So I know I have questions, and I'm sure other people do. So I will hold off. And I know if you have questions and you don't want to be heard, just type them in to Andrew. And also don't forget to give him a little love there from the audience for giving us such an awesome presentation.
No problem, Gay. Appreciate it. Thanks, Bart. I see your note there.
That's awesome. So I'm blown away by the amount that you could get that kind of imagery, what you just ended up with like one pass of that. That's one pass of the drone, and then you run it through your software?
Yep. And then you download those images, and those images are taken about every 2 seconds. That's about as fast as that model of drone can take them. And like I said, we try to get overlap on these things, but at 400 feet, you can get a pretty big footprint on that image. So you can cover a lot of area fast. And yeah, you can build stuff like this in a few clicks from that software and that imagery.
Outstanding. So like 10, 15 years ago, people said, well, we'll never be able to chart Alaska. It would take 80 years if we threw everything the country has at it, and we're supposed to be doing everything that we do. Does this, obviously all this different kinds of technology would speed that up? Does that change kind of how Alaska might be better charted?
Well, yes and no. I think it does, especially things like the sail drone technology. If we can reduce the cost, and the sail drones don't cost much compared to the conventional way of getting 15, 20 people on a ship out there. They're a lot less expensive. If we can kind of leverage that technology and get fleets of these things out surveying, then I think, yeah, totally, that's going to be the way to really speed this up and meet some of these goals to chart the EEZ in the next 10 years. So yeah, totally, this kind of technology is going to help. Now, when we're using these things like the Seaworker 5 in really shallow water, I don't think that's an incredibly productive approach for speeding that system up, because we're kind of replacing a manned boat with a robot boat, but we're sort of proceeding at the same rate of survey overall versus a manned boat. And just because of the complexity of the areas, these really shallow areas that are rocky, like the Norton Sound project, are really intensive. A lot of line miles, a lot of time on site, and they're not really well suited yet for some of these fully autonomous technologies like sail drone. But if you put those sail drones further offshore where it's safer and there's less complexity, those things are going to be able to knock out a lot of area fast.
Right. Now, I don't know if you want to stop share or stop your screen from swirling around your
There we go.
thing there. But it looks like that Barbara has a few questions for you. She wrote in the chat. You're also getting lots of nice comments from people,
Oh, thank
including
you,
someone who
everybody.
was on the Norton Sound project. So that's awesome. Thanks for joining.
Okay. Oh, Tina. Okay. Yep, that's right. Okay, from JOA. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Barb, do you want to ask your question or do you want to type it in?
No, can you hear me?
Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
perfect. Yeah, thanks. This was fantastic. My question was a couple of them is how do you work the tides? Of course, that isn't specific to your project, but in knowing that Kuskokwim has like 3-foot tides, but other places have larger or smaller.
Yeah. We use them to our advantage. When we're working in these really shallow areas, it's of a lot of benefit to time it around high tide. So NOAA gives us a depth specification that go, well, we want you to survey into X meters of water, and their usual specification is 3.5 meters. So that's kind of the magic number we're trying to reach. Now that's 3.5 meters at mean low water, so basically a low tide. So if we can get in there at a high tide, we can cover a lot of area a lot faster and still hit the depth specification that they want to. So Norton Sound, yeah, that didn't have much tide there.
Yeah.
But still a little bit of tide helped. Also, especially when we're working these areas around Stebbins and St. Michael, and we have to work in that particular area. They want us to go into 2 meters just to get additional data for the barges. And so, yeah, that was definitely kind of a high tide, and so there's not much of tide there type of operation. Now, some of the areas we worked have like down by Sand Point can have 4 or 5 meters of tide, and it's just amazing. It's like wow, we got 5 meters of water and on top of the 3.5 we're supposed to get to. So you can be in over 8 meters of water at high tide and still be meeting your 3.5 meter depth requirement. And of course, the opposite's true when the tide's low. It's a real struggle, and we try to avoid going too shallow when the tide's low. The exception to that is for that shoreline verification work that I was showing, where we want to do that at low tide. It used to be with a skiff. Now we're doing it with drones. You can actually see the rocks sticking out of the water. So, but yeah, basically we try to work those tides as much as we can.
Perfect. And my other thought was when you had at the beginning of the show, you had your 18-foot, unmanned boat, 2-ton, and then you had your sailcraft. I mean, is there a choice? And if you mentioned it, I missed it. How do you make your selection of what to use? Is the 18-foot more in the deeper water or the larger wave water, or is that just convenience?
So they're really two different technologies with strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
That 18-foot boat, you can still see my screen there.
Oops. Oh, I just
well, that's
actually I thought you were
going to bring it up.
No, you can hit share screen. I was trying to make it so your face would be bigger for people, but just hit share screen and it'll come back up again.
Here, share that. So that should be back. Yeah, I'm just going to bring that up. Bring one up here. Let's see, where are you?
Apologies for that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean this boat is kind of the Seaworker 5, the 18-foot boat is really for it still requires a lot of interaction.
Okay.
So you have to be in a constant radio link to the larger boat. I would say max range is 4 or 5 miles away, but you're still dependent on the larger boat to keep an eye out for navigation, for other ships and things that it might run into.
Fishing nets.
Fishing.
Yep. And that was going to be my question about the range. Okay, thanks. That's very
Yeah,
great.
no problem. And those sail drones are more for, they can go by themselves hundreds of miles off the coast. But you're not going to want to get them in to really shallow water. They can't maneuver.
Right.
They don't have a degree of autonomy yet where they can circle rocks and then quickly respond to things that are in the water, like this boat can.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
All right, any other questions for Andrew? Someone asks, Julia asks, another JOA employee. Thanks for the presentation. What is on your agenda for 2021?
Rumor has it that we will end up in Igagig in Bristol Bay.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, so we put in a proposal for that work, and we've been talking with NOAA about that. And yeah, it's never actually formal till they award us the work. But it sounds like we'll probably be in southeast side of Bristol Bay there.
So my other question was, you said that in some of these cases, when you came up north, there were soundings that were from the Russian era, right? When
Right.
we were Russian. So, or I've heard maybe even Captain Cook did some of this stuff. So how did you go back and look at how accurate was it? I mean, given that it's been, I don't know, 100+ years, how did it line up when you went back over some of these places? Were they pretty accurate, or was it?
Some of it's not bad. The one I'm thinking of in particular was that Cape Prince of Wales Shoal project. Trying to find my slide here from that guy. Where are you? Probably this one. Yeah, so this project, if you can see on the chart here, there's this blue 10 fathom area. I remember those, we were told by NOAA, those came from Russian charts.
It's amazing.
And as I recall, they was pretty close. I mean, we might have got, 9 fathoms where it was showing 10, but it wasn't drastically different. It was some of that stuff, even hundreds of years old sometimes, are amazing how accurate it can still be.
Yeah, that was
especially with lead lines and sextants and some of the way they used to position some of this stuff for it to agree at all is always makes you marvel at how these guys used to do this work before
right.
GPS and sonars and all the good stuff we have now.
I have another question, but anyone else have a question for Andrew? My background is in biology, right? And I looked at I wrote it down, structure from motion,
Right.
where you fly over and I mean, that seems rather extraordinary to me, but I was thinking for your company or whatever, do you have any application or does anyone even know about that in the wildlife world, where if you're trying to maybe count caribou or something like that, where you can fly over and get height and sort of individuals, as opposed to with such a with the drone, if you're doing coastal work for some kind of sea lion or something, or a moose on shore, a moose inland, is there any would that work? I don't know enough about it, of course, but it just seemed like, holy cow, you could probably do some things quite quickly.
Yeah, I think the only problem with that, with how we're doing it, is the kind of limited range on the, we're using, like I said, off the shelf Phantom 4.
Right.
We're required to keep it within visual line of sight at all times. So it sort of limits you to within a couple miles at most.
Right.
And that's pushing it up a larger boat. So if you get these areas that are really spread out, or you need to really reach out and touch, it's still hard to do with with these drones. I mean, there are other ones, gas powered, bigger drones. You know, the FAA has a lot of restrictions over, you know, beyond line of sight work that you might have to do for that, some of that stuff. But I could totally see it. I mean, a lot of that stuff's just going to go that way in the future. We're all going to have Amazon, you know, dropping stuff in our yard here before too long. So all that's going to be beyond line of sight type operations for drones, but we're still operating the way we do it in the line of sight rules.
You were mentioning cats earlier.
Cats, yeah. My
Yeah.
wife has 10
Here.
cats. So, yeah,
Yeah.
They love the drone in that yard when it chases them. So yeah.
No, I just mean, I start talking at this screen and they come right over, right in the middle of everything. So, so thank you for your patience. It looks like you've got some more comments in the chat. Okay, it sounds like people have done drones for walrus surveys in Russia, but I don't think they're using that. They're probably just using a photograph. So great. All right, well, thank you very much, Andrew. I don't think, unless someone has another question, I hope we get you back up in Norton Sound, and I hope we can get you back on Strait Science again. And I hope you can, if you want me to send you these comments and questions, if that's of interest to you, I can do that easily enough.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate being here. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, I see a comment there, some dive teams in Hawaii, SFM for coral reef work, but handheld. Yeah, that's the other thing about SFM that's a good point, is that it doesn't have to be from a drone. You can get apps for your smartphone that you just go take overlapping photos like of your house, and it will use the exact same technology to build you a 3D model that you can now you know, scroll around. So it's just
amazing.
Yeah, so it's really cool stuff. And yeah, you can get apps for your smartphone. And this is just kind of a way of, you know, using a drone and you know, images that are straight down to cover a lot of area fast and develop a 3D model of shoreline. But yeah, it's kind of becoming a bigger and bigger deal all the time.
Well, thank you so much, because I've learned tons. I just figured you guys tootle along and do the echo sounder. I had no idea it was so involved and so modernized and such fantastic data. And you're a great presenter. Great presenter.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I hope we get you back, and Bristol Bay is going to luck out.
Yeah, that should be a fun one. Yeah, I was just thinking there was one point in one of these jobs we actually had 2 drones up at once, because there was 2 of us certified to fly them. So we had 2 drones up at once, and Sea Worker 5. So we're like, man, we got 3 robots going all at once here. This is cool. So
yeah,
future, but yeah, it's fun technology to play with. But yeah, greatly appreciate you having me. This was fun, and yeah, I got a lot more material too I could share. It's always kind of hard to jam it into short periods of time.
There's from Dan V in the chat box. It says, watch out for the salmon fishery in the Igigik district. So you will have quite a bit of dodging to do with, I'm sure, with set nets and things.
That's a great
like
comment, because we actually proposed starting that work. Initially, we were like, well, we're going to go start that in June. We want to get out there and get it done. And then we talked to a lot of the fishermen. It's like, ooh, that's not a good idea. It's going to be talking about fishing nets. And so we actually delayed our start until late July, which we understand we're going to miss most of the fishing. So yeah, so we're starting later than we would normally want to start, but I think we'll be glad that we did that. But yeah, that's a great comment.
All right. Well, thanks again. And we will hopefully get you back. I think you'll be back in the region, and we'll look out for you. Let us know when you're coming back.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I see the note on the silver fishing there. Yeah, we got to get out there at some point though and get it done. So it's like, all right, we're gonna have to deal with something, but try to miss most of the fishing. But yeah. Okay, well, yeah, greatly appreciate it. Hope everybody has a great weekend, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks from one Alaska side of Alaska to the other. We appreciate having you up here.
Absolutely, no problem. I'll exit on out of here.
Okay, we'll all shut her down.